Alright everybody, it's Black Panther time. You knew I had to comment on it, so don't give me that look. Why did I have to comment on this pop culture and black culture phenomenon? Well, those of you who've taken the trouble and the time to actually look through my catalog of YouTube videos should probably already get it. Black pride and black advancements, the cause that's often referred to as uplifting the race, that's a major concern of mine. I usually have a bit of a cynical streak when it comes to pop culture in general, and particularly the use of literature or cinema or other forms of art to try to get across political and cultural points. I think it all too often backfires and you end up with characters that are rather cardboard, dialogue that's stilted, plots that are unrealistic. I think Atlas Shrugged, which is beloved by many of my fellow libertarians, although not by me, is a perfect example of that. But in Black Panther's case, I was very pleased with the outcome. It's not perfect, but it's a pretty damn good flick on the whole. Here are my 5 reasons why. First of all, I am thrilled to see this portrayal of a black society that's run from the top to the bottom by black people and that is technologically advanced and sophisticated. It's united, it's well-functioning, it's a far cry from the portrayal of black folks in general, whether it's African countries in the motherland or whether it's black people in the African diaspora of which I'm a member, not only in fictional portrayals but also in real-world reporting and analysis. What I particularly like about Wakanda is that it's a country that refuses to accept foreign aid, a black society that stands on its own 2 feet. In case I haven't made this clear in my past YouTube videos, I'm a big fan of the idea of black folks standing on our own 2 feet, not only individually but collectively as well. I recognize that in the real world there are limits to our ability to achieve self-reliance, but to my way of thinking that doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive for it, that we shouldn't seek to approach true self-reliance asymptotically, as I'm fond of saying. In other words, like in the concept from mathematics that some of you may remember learning in high school, if you have a line on a graph and a curve that comes closer and closer to that line but never quite gets there, it gets closer and closer by ever smaller, infinitely smaller increments without it ever quite reaching there. That's how we should strive for the greatest degree of self-reliance that can be realistically achieved. We won't get total self-sufficiency, and I don't think we should even seek that, but we should get as close to it as possible, as a people. That's why I'm a big fan of Black Panther. It portrays a black society that isn't seen as the world's charity case. More on that later. Second of all, I'm really intrigued and fascinated by the character of Eric Killmonger. I don't want to spoil the movie for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, so I won't go into too much detail here. But let me just say, I like the fact that Killmonger is himself a product of the African diaspora, as well as having roots in Wakanda. He seems to have been motivated by the idea that Wakanda has let down other African societies and the African diaspora by keeping its vibranium supply entirely to itself and not sharing that resource and the fruits thereof and the advantages that it offers with other black people worldwide. He seeks to go about correcting that injustice in some very disturbing and problematic ways. To put it mildly, Killmonger as a villain reminds me of Magneto from the X-Men. He's actually driven by a legitimate grievance at bottom because Magneto is at least partly motivated by a desire to fight back against the oppression and persecution of mutants. But ultimately he goes too far. And therefore the good guys, while on some level sympathizing with his motives, still realize they have to stop it. Now, however, let's target some aspects of the film that make it arguably problematic in its own right. Of course, this is where the conversation has the potential to become a little bit difficult. So I'll try and be diplomatic about this. If there's anything really tricky about Black Panther and the premise on which it's based, it's the whole vibranium thing. My concern is that portraying a black society that's so sophisticated and advanced, but chalking it up to the fact that this vibranium meteor crashed in the country or on its territory eons ago, and that, let's face it, very fanciful substance is the only apparent reason why Wakanda has been able to achieve this superiority, that's troubling in a way. It risks implying that that's the only way black folks can hack it. That's the only way we can really measure up to other societies around the world. The only way a black society, whether it's in Africa or in the diaspora, can really compete effectively and meaningfully and achieve on a level with others, with the Western world, with white people, with whoever you want to name, is by having this artificial and supernatural leg up from this fanciful substance that just happened to crash on that particular black society's territory. So if there's any fundamental flaw in Black Panther that I can see, that would be it. And that, in a way, brings me to my final observation, or rather, my final question. Food for thought. Is a superhero movie that's based on this kind of premise really a piece of art, a work of art, around which black communities and societies should be rallying to the extent that we are? Should we be embracing it to the extent that we do? And I say this as someone, as a black person who has embraced it and is embracing it. One thing I didn't mention at the outset of this video is that this is the first movie I have gone to see in the theaters more than once since The Departed. And that was more than 11 years ago. I don't even go to the movies very often in general, so that should give you some idea of how much of a chord Black Panther struck with me. Yet, I still can see legitimate grounds for criticism of not the film itself so much as black people's responses to it. Should we be so enthusiastic about this kind of movie? Ultimately, my answer to the question is, sure, yes, let's go ahead and embrace it. There's no harm done. Personally, I suspect that given the impact, the cultural impact that this movie is having among black folks in particular, we may end up seeing Wakanda take a certain proud place in black mythology almost. I think that we could see Wakanda become used in future eras from generation to generation as a representation of an ideal, or at least idyllic, black society. Sort of like Valhalla to the Vikings, or the Norse peoples of old, or Shangri-La, or El Dorado, places like that. I remember when I was growing up in the 90s, in a very black conscious black family, it was understood that we all had to see the miniseries Roots at least once. Another movie that we sort of had to see was Malcolm X. Movies that had a lot to do with representations of strong, proud, independent, successful black people and great black leaders from history and so on. As well as the story of our experiences as a people, our struggles, etc., etc. I think Black Panther has already become just that same kind of legend, if you will, within the black community, and I think that's only going to continue as time goes by. Since the movie's already been so successful, smashed a bunch of box office records, etc., we're definitely going to see probably a few sequels, because you know how Hollywood is. So I think it's going to turn into a franchise that's just going to become more and more influential among black people as time goes by. At least as long as they continue to do good things with the franchise and not screw it up the way J.J. Abrams has done to the Star Wars franchise. But I digress. Don't get me started on that, by the way. Ultimately, I think that Black Panther is a really inspiring story. I think it has the potential to inspire black folks to tell more of these kinds of stories in the future. Personally, I would like to see a story that's actually realistic, with none of the superhero accoutrements, but just a story of a black society, whether it's in Africa or in the diaspora, that actually uses real-world tools and skills and strategies and policies to dig its way out of poverty and to achieve the kind of development that we've seen in certain other non-white societies in recent years, particularly in East Asia and to some extent South Asia, countries like India and China, or before them, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, of course. Non-white societies that have pulled themselves up from poverty and achieved economic parity, and to some extent, increasingly, maybe even geopolitical parity with the Western world, with predominantly white societies like those in North America and Europe. I would like to see that development take place in real life, God knows, but I'd like to see that story told on the big screen or perhaps in the form of a TV series. I'd like to see black folks competing with and beating members of other populations and people of other backgrounds and just establishing ourselves on an equal social, economic, technological, and political footing with all of the other members and branches of the human family. But I'd like to see them do it in the real world using real world skills and techniques and strategies and policies, not just using supernatural constructs like vibranium. But hey, it's not as if Black Panther prevents that from happening. If anything, I think it makes it that much more likely to take place. I think it makes those kinds of stories much more likely to be told. And now that it's doing so much to disprove this notion in Hollywood that an all-black cast or a mostly black cast or a substantially black cast can't carry a film and can't attract enough moviegoers to theaters and therefore turn a profit, I think we'll be more likely to see these stories being told, to see them get the kind of financing that they need in order to get out to the public. So for those reasons, I say Hats off to you, Black Panther. Hats off to you, Ryan Coogler, and all the rest of the cast of the film, and the crew, and the producers, all of you who made this project successful, who got it off the ground and got it out there to moviegoers' eyeballs. This is a story, the kind of story that not only black people, but the whole world needed to see told, and I'm just glad to have been here to see it.